evening, everybody. Nice to see you all. Things have really dovetailed super nicely. Didn't plan any of it, but Pastor Mike asked Pastor Pete to deliver some science, and he can't because he's an artist, but I happen to be a scientist, so I'll provide the science. And the testimony we just heard kind of talks about being on the front line, and that's more or less kind of what I wanted to chat a bit about today too. So I thought I'm a young person, and it's kind of my duty to make use of technology in its fullest sense. So I try to do some snazzy things tonight. Last time I gave a talk on Zoom, Frosty told me never to use the fonts that I used ever again, and that he'd give me like a graphic design masterclass. He never did, but tonight I've got some slides, and I used as like little amount of font as possible. So let's see how this goes. Technology. Hey, it's me. Can everyone see me all right? I reckon they can. I got some nods, some thumbs. Thank you. That looks so funny. All right, let's get down to business. So start of the year. I thought first Wednesday United for the year, let's give some directives. Let's kind of look about big picture, what we want this year to be like. And that kind of led me more or less to this idea. Slide 2. So first up, I can't take credit for this idea. I had a Zoom call doing some NYC planning the other week, and Benny Lee from Lismore is always spinning a phrase and always has something catchy to say. And so one of the phrases that stuck out, he said at some point was, "We're the revival fellowship, not the survival fellowship." And brother Jimmy Roman mentioned that in his talk on Sunday a couple of weeks ago, and that stuck with me. And so I guess in thinking about that, it kind of prompts you to have a think about, well, what are we doing that's just surviving, and what are we doing to thrive as a fellowship? So we don't want to be the survival fellowship. That's it. And that, yeah, a bit of Photoshop skills right there. Ephesians 6, if you're talking about survival, and if you're talking about thrival, that's not a word, but I'm going to make it. Ephesians 6 kind of talks about the armor of God. And then I guess when you're in battle, that's kind of the stuff that keeps you alive, helps to protect you. But I guess one thing I didn't really think about is the fact that armor is super heavy. Like, it's not an easy thing to carry around. And so if you're going to be putting on this armor of God and you're not going into battle, why would you bother putting it on? I mean, I'd encourage you also, I'm not going to look into it for the sake of time today, but to read Ephesians 6 and see what each of those pieces of armor gives you, because they're really specific, and they kind of gives you further insight into the nature of things like faith and all that. But the main point I want to make here is that why would you lug around all these heavy pieces if you're not going to make use and go into the battle? I guess if you're wearing them, you're going to, and you're not actively going into the battle for the Lord on a daily basis, then you're going to want to take them off and not see the need for them. So now this is a slightly tangential point, but it'll come around in a loop in a sec. This is a science aspect of things. So Newton's first law, sorry, Frosty, for the fonts. But this is Newton's first law. This is like high school physics kind of level. And it's also known as the law of inertia. And so it says an object at rest remains at rest, and an object in motion remains in motion at a constant speed and in a straight line unless it's acted upon by an unbalanced force. So I guess you can think of the idea of a rock, and that's at rest. And unless it's acted upon by a force like my sheer strength, biceps, and I throw that rock, it's just going to stay there. And so if you're, things have inertia, everything that's an object, everything that has mass has inertia, and it's just this general resistance to change. And I think that's super relevant to us as humans in general. I mean, we have a lot of inertia as it is. I mean, physically, yes, but spiritually, we have a lot of spiritual inertia. And I guess one good example is just normal prayer sessions. I like to kind of call the first 5 to 10 minutes of a prayer time the inertia zone, because I feel like it takes a while to get the cogs turning and the wheels moving before then you can kind of get that real great time of prayer. So we're physical beings and we live in a physical world, and it's often tough to get things going spiritually. But when we do, once we manage to get things, kind of turning over spiritually, there's this constant kind of influence of external forces in the world that affect us, and they slow us down. They help to reduce our motion. And if we let them, they ultimately bring us to a stop. And so like this first law says, things are going to move at a constant speed unless they're acted upon by an external force. And there's a constant there, which is the external force of the world or the things of the flesh around us. And even if things are going great spiritually, there's always going to be this additional force to slow us down. And so we need to attempt to prevent it from slowing us. Just to save you, I'll get my head out of the way. There's a scripture, save you turning there in case. Oh, yeah, I mean, you can if you want. 2 Corinthians 10. And starting in verse 3, it says, "For though we walk in the flesh, we don't war after the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ, and having in a readiness to revenge all disobedience when your obedience is fulfilled." That last verse I've never really read in full, or at least its meaning hasn't really dawned on me. And I find that interesting that once your obedience has been fulfilled, to make sure that you revenge all the disobedience that you showed in the past. Interesting idea. So the only way really to counteract all these kind of damaging, slowing down forces of the flesh is through an opposite force. And I hope you're still with me here. I've said the word force a lot. If there's no spiritual input in your life, the influence of this world really is certainly going to grind your momentum to a halt. And these negative forces are constant, and you can rely that they're going to be there. They're strong, they're unchanging. And so we need to recognize that and understand that if that's a constant, the only factor that we have that we can control is the spiritual side of things. So you have your armor on for a reason. Don't just sit there with it. I mean, if you see someone in a battlefield and they're sitting, hiding behind a rock or something, you'd say, where's your honor? I mean, where's the bravery? You're a soldier. Get out there. Get out and fight. Get some bravery about you and go out in the front lines. And it's a tough conversation to have with ourselves, but I know there's times where I could say that to myself and say, you're supposed to be out here honoring Christ. Why aren't you demonstrating that by going out and using the armor? If you're living comfortably too, you're probably doing something wrong. That's something that I've learned maybe in the last couple of years. Jimmy Roman also mentioned, I'm shouting out my brother tonight, the front line. If I was to think about what a front line is, the first thing I would think it isn't is comfortable. It's probably supposed to be the most uncomfortable of places. There's always things happening. There's always threats to your life. Things are always changing. There's challenges and there's opportunities. And so if you're living comfortably, then I think you might not exactly be where you need to be for the Lord. Now, this is going to be our last scripture passage, 2 Chronicles 32, starting in verse 7. It says, "Be strong and courageous. Be not afraid nor dismayed for the king of Assyria, nor for the multitude that is with him." So this is the children. It was the tribe of Judah, I think, and they were getting attacked by the Assyrians. And it says, "For there be more with us than with him." And so we can take the king of Assyria as a bit of a metaphor for the world and the challenges we face and the people that we come up against. Verse 8 says, "With him is an arm of flesh, but with us is the Lord our God to help us and to fight our battles." And the people rested themselves upon the words of Hezekiah, king of Judah. I think it's really cool to think of a couple points there. First off, whoever we're facing has an arm of flesh, but we have the Lord our God to help us. And he himself actually fashioned flesh. So how much more does he have control over everything? And so now that you recognize that he's got control like that, you can rest like the people of Judah. And so, yes, we have to get kitted up and wear the armor, but it's not necessarily us that does the stabbing and all that stuff. So we are the Revival Fellowship. We're not the Survival Fellowship. We're here to grow, not just survive. And if we allow ourselves to become the Survival Fellowship, really the irony of that in the long run is that that's the mentality that will kill us. So if we just try to stay constant, it's the negative external forces of the world that will tip the balance that we've got into a recession. It's going to slow our spiritual momentum to a point at which we stop moving. We need to be active. We also need to be uncomfortable, and we need to be growing. So what are you going to do about it? That's for you to answer, not me, because my time is up.